Somebody in your house is mixing baking soda and vinegar right now, thinking they're making a super weapon. They're not. They're making foam, fizz, and a lot of noise. And then they're rinsing that foam straight down the drain along with whatever grime they were actually trying to remove. I've walked into more homes than I can count where the sink still smells sour, the grout still gray, and the person swears they deep cleaned it last weekend. They didn't. They ran a science fair volcano and called it a day. And by the end of this, you're going to know exactly why that fizzing is actually working against you, not for you. Here's what actually happens in most kitchens and bathrooms. Somebody reads online that baking soda and vinegar is the natural cleaning combo. They dump both on a stained pan or a ring around the tub, watch it bubble up, feel like they did something, wipe it off, and move on. 3 days later, the stain is back. Sometimes it never even left. It just got covered in foam for 90 seconds and then rinsed away before it had a chance to do anything. I see this constantly on grout lines. People scrub with a vinegar-soaked rag, sprinkle baking soda on top, watch the fizz, wipe, and walk away satisfied. Then they call me 2 months later wondering why the grout is still dingy, sometimes worse than before, with a slightly chalky white residue sitting in the low spots. That residue is baked in baking soda that never got rinsed properly, and it's now trapping dust and turning into a paste every time the shower runs. Same story with garbage disposals. Somebody pours in half a box of baking soda, chases it with a cup of vinegar, hears the fizzing, and thinks the smell problem is solved. It usually is for about a day, because the fizzing reaction didn't cut through the actual biofilm sitting on the blades and under the splash guard. It just knocked loose the surface layer and left the real gunk sitting there to keep growing bacteria and keep making that smell. Give it 48 hours and the same sour odor is right back. And now the person's convinced their disposal unit is broken when really it just never got properly cleaned in the first place. The part that gets missed is that most people don't even notice the buildup until it's a real problem. A little bit of soap scum on a shower door doesn't bother anyone. A little bit of grease film on a stovetop doesn't look like much either. It's not until the grout goes from off-white to genuinely gray, or the pan has a stain that survives a normal wash, that people start reaching for these two ingredients. And by then, the fizzy foam approach usually isn't strong enough to actually fix what's built up over weeks or months. It shows up outside the kitchen and bathroom too, and this is the part people never expect. I get calls about laundry stains that won't come out even after somebody pre-treated with a baking soda and vinegar paste. Same fizzing, same brief satisfaction, same disappointing result once the shirt comes out of the dryer with the stain baked in permanently because heat set it before anyone realized the pre-treatment never actually broke the stain down in the first place. I get calls about tarnished silver that somebody scrubbed with the combo, only to find it looking worse with a dull, slightly foggy finish that wasn't there before. I get calls about hardwood floors that lost their shine after weeks of somebody mopping with a vinegar-based natural cleaner because a blog told them it was safer than anything from the store. And there's the smell problem, which might be the most common one of all. Mattresses, upholstered furniture, carpets. People sprinkle baking soda on these, let it sit for a few minutes, vacuum it up, and figure the smell's handled. Sometimes it barely touches the smell because the odor is trapped deep in the padding or the fibers, way below where a light dusting of powder and a quick vacuum pass can reach. The baking soda absorbed whatever was sitting right on the surface and left everything underneath untouched. A week later, the smell's back. Usually stronger because whatever caused it in the first place, spilled milk, pet accidents, sweat, never actually got treated, just lightly powdered over. Here's the thing that ties all of this together. None of these are edge cases. This is what happens in a normal week for an average household that's leaning on natural cleaning advice without understanding what these two products are actually built to do. And there's a bigger issue underneath all of this. Nobody's actually testing which one of these two products works better for which job. They're just mixed together on instinct because that's what a video told them to do once. I want to actually break this down the way I'd explain it to a new guy on my crew. What each one is actually good at, what happens chemically when you combine them, and where people are wasting their time and possibly damaging their surfaces. Let's get into the actual chemistry, because this is where almost everybody gets it backwards. Baking soda is sodium bicarbonate. It's a base. Vinegar is acetic acid. It's an acid. When you mix a base and an acid together, they neutralize each other. That fizzing you see isn't cleaning power being unleashed. It's a chemical reaction happening. The acid and the base are canceling each other out, releasing carbon dioxide gas, which is what makes the bubbles. By the time that fizzing stops, what you're left with is mostly water, a little sodium acetate, and trace amounts of both original ingredients that didn't fully react. You've basically watered down both cleaners to get a show. I learned this the hard way, not from a chemistry class, but from watching my grandfather correct me on a job back when I was maybe 19. I was scrubbing a break room counter with the mix it all together method, feeling proud of the fizz, and he stopped me and said something like, "You're not cleaning that counter, you're just making it wet." At the time, I didn't fully get it. Years later, doing this full time, I understood exactly what he meant. The reaction itself isn't doing the scrubbing. The physical agitation and the individual properties of each product are what do the work, and combining them cancels out a chunk of that. So what does each one actually do on its own? Vinegar is genuinely good at cutting mineral deposits, hard water stains, lime scale on faucets, calcium buildup around drains, soap scum that's got a mineral component to it. The acid in vinegar dissolves those mineral bonds. That's why straight vinegar works so well on a shower head that's clogged with calcium, or on a coffee maker with mineral scale inside it. It's also decent as a mild disinfectant and a good deodorizer because it changes the pH environment that a lot of odor-causing bacteria like to live in. Baking soda, on the other hand, is mostly valuable for two things: mild abrasion and odor absorption. As a fine, slightly gritty powder, it works as a gentle scrubbing agent that won't scratch most surfaces the way a harsher abrasive would. That's why it's good on baked-on grease in a pan, on grout lines that need actual physical friction to loosen the grime, or on a bathtub ring that's mostly built up soap and skin oil rather than mineral deposits. It also chemically neutralizes acidic odor molecules, which is why it sits in refrigerators absorbing smell instead of just masking it. When you look at those two lists, you start to see the actual problem with mixing them. Vinegar is best used on mineral and hard water buildup. Baking soda is best used on grease, oil, and organic grime through physical abrasion. Those are two different jobs. Mixing them together doesn't create a combined cleaner that handles both. It creates a diluted, mostly neutral liquid that's worse at both jobs than either ingredient would have been on its own, used correctly for the right kind of mess. There's also a surface damage angle that almost nobody brings up. I've seen natural stone counters, marble, travertine, some limestone, get etched by straight vinegar because the acid reacts with the calcium carbonate in the stone itself. People think they're being gentle and natural, and they end up putting permanent dull spots into an expensive countertop. That's not a rare fluke either. I've been called out to look at etched marble more times than I can count, and it's almost always vinegar, straight or in a natural homemade spray, sitting on the stone for way too long. Metal reacts differently depending on what it is, and this trips people up constantly. Vinegar works great on stainless steel for cutting water spots and light rust because stainless resists the acid pretty well over short exposure times. But that same vinegar left sitting on cast iron will start breaking down the seasoning layer, that black, slightly slick coating that took years to build up through repeated oil and heat cycles. I've seen people strip a grandmother's cast iron skillet down to bare gray metal in a single afternoon because they thought a vinegar soak would clean it up nice. It cleaned it all right. It cleaned off 40 years of seasoning along with the grime. Silver has its own version of this problem. Baking soda paste on silver works through mild abrasion, and that's fine for cleaning general tarnish, but scrub too hard or too long, and you're physically wearing down the plating on anything that isn't solid silver. That dull, foggy look people complain about after cleaning silver with baking soda isn't tarnish coming back, it's actual micro-scratching from over-scrubbing with a powder that's more abrasive than people give it credit for. And on fabric and carpet fibers, the reason a light sprinkle of baking soda doesn't fix a real odor problem comes down to depth. Odor-causing bacteria and residue sit down inside the fiber structure and the padding underneath, not just on the surface where a vacuum can reach. Baking soda neutralizes odor molecules it comes into direct contact with. It doesn't migrate downward on its own, and it definitely doesn't kill the bacteria that's continuing to produce the smell in the first place. Without deeper extraction or an enzyme-based treatment that actually breaks down organic residue, baking soda is just papering over the surface of a problem that lives several layers down. But here's the part people always skip when they're trying to fix this at home, and it's the one step that actually determines whether any of this works at all. Mistake number 1. Mixing them together expecting a supercharged cleaner. I already walked through the chemistry, but it's worth repeating because it's the single most common thing I see people do wrong. The fizzing feels productive. It's satisfying. It looks like something's happening. And there's a whole internet culture built around natural cleaning hacks that treats this combo like it's some kind of miracle formula. In reality, you're neutralizing both ingredients' active properties and diluting the whole thing with the water that's naturally in vinegar. If you want the acid to work, you need it staying acidic. If you want the base to work, you need it staying basic. Combining them defeats both purposes. I've tested this side by side more times than I can count. Same stain, same surface, one side treated with the mix, the other treated with whichever single product actually matched the mess. The single product side wins every single time, and it isn't close. Mistake number 2. Using vinegar on the wrong surfaces and leaving it on too long. This is the natural stone problem I just mentioned, but it goes further than stone. Vinegar can dull the finish on hardwood floors over time because the acid slowly breaks down certain floor finishes and waxes. It can also damage grout sealant if it's left to sit rather than being applied and rinsed promptly. People treat vinegar like it's harmless because it's natural and food safe. But acid is acid. It doesn't ask what surface it's touching before it starts reacting with it. I've seen people spray straight vinegar on granite counters daily as their go-to cleaner, and then wonder 6 months later why the counter looks etched and dull instead of glossy. Mistake number 3. Not rinsing baking soda residue thoroughly or using it dry as a polish and leaving it sitting. Baking soda doesn't dissolve especially well in cold water. If you scrub with a baking soda paste and then just wipe it with a dry or barely damp rag, you're leaving behind a fine mineral film. That film attracts more dust, and every time moisture hits it, shower steam, a wet sponge, humidity, it reactivates into a slightly gritty paste again. That's exactly the chalky residue I mentioned earlier that people mistake for the grout itself looking dirty. It's not the grout, it's leftover baking soda that was never rinsed with genuinely hot water and enough of it. There's a fourth one worth mentioning too, even though it's less common. People treat this combo as a disinfectant. It's not in any meaningful, tested sense. Baking soda and vinegar might reduce some surface bacteria somewhat through the mild acid and abrasion, but neither one is registered or tested as a disinfectant that kills things like norovirus or salmonella the way a proper disinfecting product is. If you've got a cutting board that touched raw chicken or a bathroom that had actual illness go through the house, this combo is not what you reach for. That's a mistake I see a lot with people who've gone fully natural and dropped every commercial product from their cabinet. They end up underprotected in situations where it actually matters. Mistake number 5, and this one's specific to fabric and upholstery, treating baking soda as a one-time fix instead of part of a longer process. People sprinkle it on a mattress, vacuum it up 20 minutes later, and expect the smell to be gone permanently. When it isn't, they assume baking soda just doesn't work for that kind of odor, and they give up on it entirely instead of understanding it was only ever meant to handle the surface layer. The actual source of the smell, sweat, oils, spills, is still sitting down in the padding, and no amount of surface powder is going to reach it without something that can actually break down that organic material first. And that brings up something almost nobody talks about. The order you do these steps in matters just as much as the products themselves, and getting the order backwards is why so many of these home fixes fall apart. Here's how I actually use these two products on real jobs separately for what they're each good at, plus where a couple of other things fit in when neither one is right for the job. Stage 1. Sort the mess by type before you touch a single product. Before you clean anything, figure out what kind of buildup you're actually dealing with. Mineral and hard water deposits look chalky white. They're usually around faucets, shower heads, inside kettles and coffee makers, and around drains. Grease and oil buildup looks darker, feels slightly sticky or waxy, and shows up on stovetops, oven interiors, range hoods, and pans. Soap scum is somewhere in between, a hazy film on shower doors and tubs that's part mineral, part oil from body wash and lotion. Get this identification right, and you'll know immediately which product to reach for, and you'll stop wasting time on a method that was never going to work on that particular mess. Stage 2. Vinegar for mineral deposits used correctly. For a shower head clogged with mineral buildup, I use full-strength white vinegar, not diluted. Pour it into a plastic bag, submerge the shower head fully, and secure the bag with a rubber band so it stays soaked. Leave it for at least 30 minutes for light buildup, up to 2 hours for heavy calcium scale that's been building for years. After soaking, run the water on full blast for a minute to flush the loosened mineral chunks out of the nozzle holes, then use an old toothbrush to knock any stubborn bits free from the openings. For a kettle or coffee maker, run a cycle of equal parts vinegar and water through the system, let it sit in the reservoir for 15 minutes if the machine allows it, then run 2 full cycles of plain water afterward to flush out any vinegar smell or taste. Skipping that second flush is the reason people say their coffee tastes weird after descaling. They didn't rinse enough. For faucet bases and drain rings with visible white crust, soak a paper towel in vinegar, press it directly onto the mineral deposit, and let it sit for 20 to 30 minutes. The direct contact time is what matters here, not the amount of vinegar you use. A thin, well-soaked paper towel that stays in contact with the surface will outperform just splashing vinegar on and wiping immediately. One thing a lot of people skip entirely: rinse and dry every vinegar application within the hour. Don't let it air dry on its own because the acid can leave micro-etching on chrome and brass finishes if it's allowed to dry in place repeatedly over time. Wipe with a clean, damp cloth, then dry with a separate dry cloth to avoid new water spots. Stage 3. Baking soda for grease, grime, and physical scrubbing jobs. For baked-on grease in a pan, sprinkle a generous layer of baking soda directly onto the pan while it's still slightly warm. Not hot, just warm, because the slight heat helps the paste work into the grease. Add just enough water to form a thick paste, not a soupy one. Let it sit for at least 20 minutes, longer for heavily baked-on layers, up to a couple of hours for genuinely old-crusted grease. Then scrub with a non-scratch scouring pad in small circular motions. The grit in the baking soda combined with the physical agitation is what breaks the bond between the grease and the pan surface. The sitting time softens it, the scrubbing removes it. For grout lines, make a thicker paste, about the consistency of toothpaste, and apply it directly along the grout with an old toothbrush or a dedicated grout brush. Let it sit for 10 to 15 minutes so it has time to absorb into the porous grout surface. Scrub in short back and forth strokes along the line of the grout, rather than circular scrubbing. On grout, circular scrubbing tends to just push grime around the edges instead of pulling it up and out. Rinse thoroughly with hot water and a clean rag, going over the area at least twice to make sure no residue is left sitting in the low spots. For range hoods and stovetop grease film, make a slightly thinner paste and let it sit for a full 30 minutes before wiping, because that kind of grease has usually had heat cycles baked into it repeatedly and needs more soak time than a single dinner's worth of splatter. Pro tip: for anything with genuinely stubborn, months-old grease, think the inside of an oven door or a range hood that hasn't been touched in a year, don't just apply the paste once. Apply it, let it sit, wipe off what comes loose, then reapply a second, thinner layer, and let that sit another 10 minutes before the final wipe. Most people do one pass, get frustrated it didn't come fully clean, and give up right before the second pass would have finished the job. I've never had a grease job that a single application handled completely if it had been sitting untouched for months. 2 passes minimum every time. Stage 4. Know when to skip both and reach for something else entirely. For actual sanitizing needs, cutting boards after raw meat, a bathroom after illness, anything touching food prep surfaces where bacteria matters, use a proper disinfectant or diluted bleach solution designed and tested for that purpose. Neither vinegar nor baking soda is a substitute here, and treating them like one is how kitchens end up with more bacteria than the person realized. For natural stone counters, granite, marble, travertine, limestone, skip vinegar entirely. Use a pH-neutral stone cleaner instead. The acid in vinegar will etch calcium-based stone over time, sometimes just after a handful of uses, and that damage isn't reversible without professional refinishing. For sealed hardwood floors, skip vinegar as a regular cleaner too. Occasional light use, well diluted on a floor with a solid, intact finish, generally won't cause visible damage right away, but repeated mopping with vinegar slowly breaks down wax and polyurethane finishes over months of use, leaving floors looking duller and more prone to scuffing. A cleaner made specifically for your floor's finish type protects that top layer instead of slowly stripping it. And for glass and mirrors, vinegar diluted with water actually does work well. That's one spot where the natural approach genuinely holds up against most commercial glass cleaners, as long as you use a lint-free cloth or newspaper to avoid streaking, since a cotton rag tends to leave lint behind that shows up once the glass dries. There's one more thing most people never think to check, and it's the difference between a fix that lasts and one that's back in a week. Stage 5, cast iron. Treat it completely differently from other metal. Never soak cast iron in vinegar for cleaning purposes unless you're intentionally stripping it down to bare metal to re-season it from scratch. If you're just trying to remove light rust spots, use a fine steel wool pad with a small amount of oil instead, working in the direction of the grain, and re-oil and heat the pan immediately afterward to protect the exposed metal. If you do need to strip old, damaged seasoning completely, a vinegar soak works, but understand that's a full restoration project, not a quick wipe and put away. Stage 6. Silver. Light touch, short time, always test first. For silver cleaning, mix a small amount of baking soda with just enough water to form a light paste, and use a very soft cloth, not a scrub brush. Apply gentle pressure in straight lines rather than circles, and check your progress every 30 seconds rather than scrubbing continuously for several minutes. On plated silver especially, stop as soon as the tarnish lifts. Continuing to scrub past that point is what wears through the plating and leaves that dull, foggy look. On a small, low visibility spot, test first before doing an entire piece, especially with anything antique or inherited, because plating thickness varies a lot piece to piece, and you won't know how much margin you have until you've tested it. Stage 7. Laundry stains. Treat before heat, not after. If you're using baking soda paste on a stain, apply it directly to the stain before washing, let it sit for at least 30 minutes, and gently work it into the fibers with an old toothbrush before tossing the item in the wash on a cold or warm cycle. Never dry the item until you confirm the stain is actually gone. Heat from the dryer sets protein and tannin stains permanently, turning a fixable problem into a permanent one. For grease-based stains on fabric, baking soda alone often isn't enough. A small amount of dish soap worked into the stain first, then baking soda paste over that gives you both the grease-cutting surfactant and the abrasive lift working together on a job baking soda alone tends to struggle with. Stage 8. Mattresses, upholstery, and carpet odor. Go deeper than a light dusting. For genuine odor problems in fabric and padding, a light sprinkle of baking soda vacuumed up 20 minutes later isn't going to reach the source. Apply a generous, even layer across the entire surface, work it gently into the fibers with a soft brush rather than just letting it sit on top, and leave it for a minimum of 8 hours. Overnight if you can manage it, so it has real time to draw moisture and odor upward out of the material. Then vacuum thoroughly afterward, going over each section slowly rather than a single quick pass. For odors that come back after this treatment, the source is usually deeper than baking soda alone can reach, and you're better off with an enzyme-based cleaner designed to actually break down the organic material causing the smell, followed by the baking soda treatment afterward to finish the job, rather than lead it. Stage 9. Drains. Deal with the actual clog, not just the smell. For drain odor, boiling water flushed down first breaks up some of the surface grease before you do anything else. Follow with a cup of baking soda directly down the drain, then a cup of vinegar right behind it, and let the fizzing reaction happen inside the pipe rather than in a bowl beforehand. The physical agitation of that reaction happening in place does more good than mixing it outside the drain first. Let it sit for 15 minutes, then flush with another round of boiling water. This helps with odor and light buildup, but it will not clear an actual clog caused by hair, grease clumps, or foreign objects. If water's draining slowly rather than just smelling bad, you're dealing with a physical blockage that needs a drain snake or professional attention, not a fizzing reaction that was never designed to cut through a solid clog in the first place. Stage 10. Maintenance, so you're not doing the full job every single time. After any vinegar treatment on a mineral-prone fixture, wipe the fixture dry after every shower for about a week. Water sitting and evaporating on the surface is what redeposits minerals in the first place, so drying it consistently for a short stretch dramatically slows how fast the buildup comes back. After a baking soda grease treatment on a stovetop, wipe the surface down while it's still slightly warm after each use going forward, rather than letting grease cool and harden repeatedly, because that's the difference between a 5-second wipe and a 20-minute soak next time. For grout, a light wipe down with a squeegee or dry towel right after every shower keeps soak film and moisture from settling into those porous lines in the first place, which is genuinely the single biggest factor in how often you'll need to do a full grout scrub. I've worked in households that squeegee daily and only need a deep grout clean once or twice a year, and households right next door, same water, same shower frequency, that need it every few weeks because nobody ever wipes the walls down. The difference isn't the products people use for the deep clean, it's whether anyone's doing the 30-second maintenance step in between. For drains, running hot water for 30 seconds after each use, especially after cooking, keeps grease from having the chance to cool and cling to the pipe walls in the first place. That single habit does more to prevent drain odor long-term than any baking soda and vinegar flush ever will, because it stops the buildup before it starts, instead of trying to dissolve it after the fact. Small habits like these are the actual difference between a house that needs a deep clean every few weeks and one that barely needs it a couple times a year. That's the real breakdown, not a fizzy, feel-good, mix-it-all-together trick, but two separate tools that each do one job well when you use them the right way on the right mess and rinse them properly and thoroughly afterward. Vinegar for mineral buildup, baking soda for grease and grit, neither one for disinfecting, neither one for natural stone, and neither one alone for a smell that's actually coming from somewhere deep in a mattress or a carpet pad. Once you start sorting your cleaning problems by type, instead of reaching for whatever combo looked satisfying in a video, you'll notice the jobs actually stay fixed instead of coming back every couple of weeks, and you'll stop wasting good products on messes they were never built to handle. If this saved you from a grout job that wasn't actually working or explained why your counter's looking duller than it used to, that's exactly why I make these videos. My grandfather ran a crew for over 30 years before my dad took it over, and I grew up hearing both of them argue about which product did what. Turns out they were usually both right, just about different jobs. That's the kind of thing you only learn from actually doing this work for decades, not from a single article somebody skimmed once. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of straight-up, tested-on-real jobs breakdown instead of recycled internet hacks. Drop a comment with whatever cleaning problem's been driving you crazy at home. Grout, grease, hard water, whatever it is, and I'll do my best to cover it in a future video. And if hard water buildup is your specific issue, go watch my video on descaling shower heads and faucets the right way. It walks through the vinegar soak method in a lot more detail than I had room for here.